In 1985, I was 25 years old. On the night in question, I remember feeling absolutely shattered. I'd been out drinking for 5 days and nights with all these detectives, and I was pleased to get some sleep. 2 o'clock in the morning, phone rang. It was my detective sergeant. He said that there's been an explosion on a boat. Can you come in? I'm like, oh my God. So I was called to Auckland Central Police Station.
The flagship of the environmental group Greenpeace was sunk today at the harbour in Auckland, New Zealand. One crew member was killed. There were 2 explosions on board the ship, and police call them suspicious.
It became apparent we were dealing with a serious crime.
Police in New Zealand say it was a bomb which sank the Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior. They're treating the death of a crewman as murder.
Someone had been murdered. The boat had been deliberately destroyed. It started to wash over us. This was going to be one of the biggest police inquiries of the century.
In New Zealand tonight, police are launching a major investigation into the explosions aboard the Rainbow Warrior.
We consider this to be a scandal of the nuclear age.
This was no accident. Somebody, somewhere, decided they wanted to blow up our boat.
Things like this just don't happen in New Zealand.
When you're powerful, you don't have to pay for your crimes.
Murderers can't go unpunished. They've got to be exposed.
All boats have characters, if you like, almost like personalities. And they have smells as well. You know how evocative smell is. Well, the Warrior had that smell. Her deck had that smell in the heat when the tar would be melting a bit between the seams of the planks. But she was not just a boat that was tangible. She also carried the intangible too. What we could do with her and what kind of hope she would carry and what kind of, all of that was part of what the Warrior was as well. She was really a lovely ship.
"1985 was our year of protesting nuclear testing in the Pacific. We were eager to go out and try to change the world to someplace better. But before we took the Warrior halfway across the world, we found ourselves in Jacksonville, Florida.
We had to get the Warrior ready to take on this campaign. We were turning the Warrior into a sailing boat. We had to put 2 masts on her. And it was this really long, huge bit of steel that they were picking up with a crane. And we had put rosemary and danced a hoolie around the collar and everything before we dropped it onto the deck just to make sure she was going to, you know, have the right mojo to carry us across the ocean. Doing this work on the Warrior, it was what joined us at the hip as a crew, making her a boat that we would sail together.
She was a North Sea trawler, and that's like saying she was built like a tank. You couldn't find a better boat to send a bunch of crazy hippies out with in the ocean. The Warrior was a place of good energy. Everybody was there because they wanted to be. They were there because they believed in what Greenpeace was trying to do.
Martini was the first mate. He looked a little bit like Keith Richards. Davey Edwards was the first engineer. Hannah Sorensen was the second engineer. She already had a lot of history with Greenpeace. Just a beautiful worker. Hank Harsam was the third engineer. Hank and I were already a couple when we joined the Warrior. And then there was Pete, one of Greenpeace's best skippers.
And then we had a photographer. Fernando Pereira was a wonderful laid-back guy, brilliant photographer.
We had a dark room on board, which was just really a cupboard. And he would be in there developing the photographs as we were going. That was part of the way of getting the story out there.
And then we had deckhands, Grace O'Sullivan from Ireland, Andy Biederman, a Swiss doctor, and there was Bunny McDermott. She was a hard-working crew member.
When I was in my 20s, I was traveling around the US, trying to figure out how to explain the world to myself. You know, I liked music, I liked dancing, but what was my role and purpose in being in the world? And then I fell in love. Hank and I, we met in New Orleans. We both had, I think, quite a strong sense of what was fair and unfair. And then one day we ran into a friend. And he was telling us about the Warrior and what the Warrior was going to be doing. And we thought, oh my God, that sounds wonderful. It was going to do this anti-nuclear campaign through the Pacific, which is where I was from. That's how I ended up on the Warrior for my first ever Greenpeace campaign.
On the Warrior in '85, we were going to go to the Marshall Islands, where the U.S. tested nuclear bombs for many, many years.
In less than a minute, you will see the most powerful explosion ever witnessed by human eyes.
The US started nuclear testing in the Pacific in 1946. They tested 67 nuclear bombs, some of them larger than the ones that blew apart Nagasaki and Hiroshima in the Second World War.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And they chose a place that they thought that nobody would care about, and that was the Marshall Islands. The US government told the Marshallese that it was for the good of all mankind. They said it was safe to detonate these horrendous things out in the middle of nowhere, but it's not out in the middle of nowhere for the people who live in the Pacific Islands. In 1985, the testing in the Marshall Islands was over, but the legacy of those tests, the contamination of both the people and the land, was still very much alive. There was one test called Bravo in 1954. The nuclear fallout, like all the stuff that got sucked up in the explosion. The wind blew it all on these inhabited islands. One of the inhabited islands was Rongelap.
The tremendous yield resulted in a serious fallout situation on Rongelap Atoll.
These people, they were like guinea pigs, basically.
Ay, no, Ako lang na talaga manager ka ulit pinipin. Naganin pinyali ko na. Yung lagmit iyan. Pinang ko lang para nakamit lukunan mo. Ito. Algo negiro tada na alterilo terreno. Ito na niya. Evacuation. Joana allo taka menomoda allo tak ecology. Allo tak kaya arme ja pada bibru di na be mi jota na iloide. Ajiro.
The US were awarded the Marshall Islands after the Second World War to look after. And what they did was set up a nuclear testing program and bomb the shit out of people, and then take no responsibility for what they did to them, except to study them.
The Marshallese caught by fallout got 175 roentgens of radiation. These are fishing people, savages by our standards. So a cross-section was brought to Chicago for testing. The first was John, the mayor of Rongelap Atoll.
We did not know the extent of the damage that was done by the nuclear testing in 1954. Until recently, from the beginning to the United States, been telling these people that there is nothing wrong. They cover up wrong thing they did.
John, as we said, is a savage, but a happy, amenable savage. The Iron Room is a radiation detector for human beings. One dot, one gamma ray.
If we are okay, why are they coming to Rongelap twice a year to monitor our health? We know something is wrong. Even though we love these small islands of ours, it is highly contaminated by radioactivity. But every time I ask for assistance from the American government, seeking a better place for my people, I have never get any assistance. So we got in contact with people of the Greenpeace organization.
In 1985, the Rongelap Islanders appealed to Greenpeace to move them off Rongelap to another atoll.
So of course we agreed. Making their story heard was important to all of us.
We wanted to get press involved, and so we invited journalists to come with us.
I had written about Greenpeace before, so I signed up. But this was perhaps the most ambitious thing they had ever done, and it was a huge risk.
They were going to go and interfere with American affairs
on a completely contaminated island.
I became Secretary of State for Defence in January of 1983 and remained in that position until 1986. I was answerable to the Cabinet for the policies of the nation's defence.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister.
That time particularly, that nuclear deterrence was essential.
We face in the Soviet Union A power whose declared aim is to bury Western civilization.
In the 1980s, the USSR was a very real threat. The Russians had deployed a modernized nuclear deterrent system in large parts of Europe. There was no doubt whatsoever that democracy did need defending. The appropriate response was for us to have an equivalent of deterrence, which took the form of the American cruise missile system. Based upon the partnership with America, our capability was real and up to date and effective.
The cost of keeping tyranny at bay is high, but it must be paid.
Were you aware of Greenpeace in the 80s?
Greenpeace? Oh, of course. We all knew about Greenpeace, and I think some of us might have felt that there was a sort of a legitimacy about the arguments they were deploying. But we might have hesitated about the techniques that they adopted.
People thought we were crazy. This is pre-internet, pre-mobile phones. We were doing something about issues rather than just talking.
Doing nothing is part of the problem. We didn't care who we angered.
He swung right in front of the harpoon. Whale-killing boat stopped dead in its tracks.
Greenpeace was notified that the Rainbow Warrior could be arrested if she was found in Spanish waters.
I mean, I've been arrested about a dozen times. I was not willing to stay home and watch the world go to hell.
Nuclear waste tipped overboard by a British ship.
Corporations and governments were always threatening them, and they were just putting up two fingers and getting on with it. That meant they had a lot of enemies.
I don't think any of us were worried about safety, but we were in it to live, not to die.
Sailing across the Pacific as an American, thinking about what we had done. The role the U.S. government played there, for me, the sense of responsibility was profound. I grew up in Connecticut, on the water. My family were sailors. There was a time when I might have become a professional yacht racer, but I was #1 in the draft lottery in the 1970s. I was expected to go to Vietnam to fight. But Vietnam War is nothing I wanted to get involved with. And I was a CO, conscientious objector. Wasn't gonna happen. I read about Greenpeace in a book, and I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with sailing for a purpose. And so I joined in 1981. I was told they would take me on as a possible deckhand. Within 3 months, I was captain of the boat, and I never wanted to get off.
Sailing into Rongelap was quite extraordinary because it is extraordinarily beautiful. And you can't see nuclear contamination. We arrived on the beach. They were singing to us, welcoming us to Rongelap. It felt warm and welcoming and kind of sad too. They were sad. It was hard for them. You know, they were leaving their home, their ancestral land.
When we first arrived, we were just shocked by realizing what we had volunteered to do. Taking 350 people and their housing across the open ocean to another atoll. That's a huge operation.
We loaded the Warrior to the gunnels. It was unbelievable how much we put on that boat. We also had all these plastic buckets on board, and I remember having a fight with Martini, the first mate, when we left Jacksonville, Florida, because we were given all these plastic buckets there, and I was being all righteous about, no, we cannot take plastic to the Pacific. And he was like, load the buckets, Bunny. I'm the first mate, like, put them on board. I'm like, oh, okay, we're loading the buckets. And I was so grateful because some of the Rongelap people got really seasick. So those buckets came in really handy, just dishing them out all over the place. Oh, thank God he's the first mate, not me.
We became aware that some of their children were quite ill as a result of the radiation. It was frightening to discover every person on Rongelap had a scar on their throat where their thyroid had been taken out.
I think we actually did 4 trips. It was 11 days of us going backwards and forwards all the time. Fernando, our photographer, he took lots and lots of photos. He was a wonderful photographer. The island we moved them to was an island called Majato.
It was about 150, 180 miles away from their contaminated atoll.
No other community lived there, so they could stay intact as a community. But there was also a reason why there was no community living on there. It wasn't great for growing and wasn't great for fishing either. But it wasn't contaminated.
And we got them there, and we got them all their stuff landed. And that's where they sit today.
I had never experienced anything like that before in my life. It affected us all, I think, to see what had happened to these people.
It wasn't so much as a political event as just helping a group of people out. It was really one of the best things I ever did in Greenpeace, for sure.
It was quite hard to say goodbye to them. But we had a campaign that we were on. In another part of the Pacific, nuclear testing was still going on.
That summer, the French were going to conduct a nuclear test out in French Polynesia.
After we'd moved the Rongelap people. Certainly made us ever more determined to do whatever we could to stop that from happening.
Mururoa, a small circular atoll ringed with coral reefs, hidden in the vast expanse of the South Pacific Ocean. Mururoa is situated on the outward reaches of an area known as French Polynesia, a cluster of tiny Pacific islands under the colonial rule of the government of France.
The French had been nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific since the mid-60s. They mostly tested at Mururoa Atoll in French Polynesia.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
They tested above ground until the early 70s. And then they started doing underground nuclear tests. Holes were bored underneath the center of the atoll, deep into the coral. And that's where they set off their bombs. And of course, coral shatters very easily. The explosions caused cracks in the reefs. It was widely believed that all these cracks were letting the radioactivity out. The French were endangering the health of the Polynesians. But of course, the French said it was perfectly safe. And in the 1980s, they were still testing when other people had given up.
L'arme nucléaire est bonne sur la paix, pour sauver le monde, pour sauver l'Europe. Il fallait développer l'arme nucléaire. La France faisait des expériences. J'étais moi-même dans l'armée quand les premiers essais nucléaires français, même au Sahara. Il y en a qui ont failli être contaminés par ces essais qui étaient dans le Sahara, etc. Et malheureusement, ou heureusement pour les capacités nucléaires de la France, malheureusement pour la Polynésie française, il a été décidé de faire des essais sous-marins ou en tout cas dans des zones non habitées, peu habitées. C'est comme ça que ça a été choisi. La stratégie nucléaire, c'est la stratégie de dissuasion. Si on n'avait pas l'arme nucléaire, on pourrait être victime.
The warriors of the rainbow, heroes of many famous campaigns, are now in Auckland on a new campaign to try to stop French nuclear testing in the Pacific.
So the plan was that we'd be in New Zealand for about 2 weeks so that we could resupply and then we'd leave for Mururoa.
Now, Bunny, I think you're the only Kiwi member of this crew. What's it been like, the trip? You haven't got bored or desperate?
No, not yet.
Are you going back to Mururoa?
Yes. Well, not going back. It'll be the first time I've been there.
Our plans were to stop them from testing. And we were going to do that by sailing into Mururoa. We were going to go into territorial waters without permission and get as close as we could to the nuclear testing site so they would be too nervous to test while we were there, or they would have to remove us. But this was a military base, which was off limits. We are ready to be arrested, but we also had the capacity to take photographs, send them out and tell a story about what was going on, and then add that to the opposition that we were trying to build globally with others to drive more nuclear disarmament.
The campaign for the abolition of nuclear weapons was very largely run by people on the left of politics. That's not to say that it was exclusively of the left. The organizations and the leaders of the campaign were all associated with left-wing organizations. I have not the slightest doubt that there were people who were sympathizers with the communist cause.
I was, at that time, a junior minister in the Foreign Office. I was given responsibility for our relations with the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, all the communist countries.
People really did believe that Greenpeace were infiltrated by the KGB.
Well, they might very well have been. Of course, they would want to encourage organizations of that kind. It was a very tense period. The people who would get most satisfaction if Greenpeace had had its way would have been the guy sitting in the Kremlin. Yeah, that's a factor that could never be ignored. I don't have the information as to who was a Soviet stooge and who was not, but I'm sure they existed.
I mean, infiltrating Greenpeace was like trying to infiltrate the YMCA. But we weren't protesting anything that was against the US or against France or that wasn't against Russia.
I mean, they had a perfectly legitimate right to make their views known. But from the government's point of view, it obviously created problems of a kind that we could well do without.
That night, the sunset was about 5:30 in the afternoon. Our campaign manager, it was his birthday that night, so we had a party. We all sang him happy birthday and had a piece of cake, some wine, and then danced. People just burned off steam.
Everyone loved dancing, loved music, yeah. It was fun. People were really excited about the next stage of the campaign.
We were eager to go out and try to change the world.
Sometimes change can happen when you least expect it. Hank and I left around 10 o'clock. We were going to stay with my parents that night.
The party, it went on and on. Some of the crew members, they went off into town that night. I went to bed at 10 o'clock. I hang my glasses up on the bookshelf that was right there, and they stayed there through any kind of weather. I went to sleep, feeling like there was not a problem in the world. All of a sudden, I was awake. My first thought was, have we hit somebody? Is it my fault? I looked out my forward porthole. I could see the lights of the dock, which meant we were tied to it. And I lay back down, relieved. And then I realized I could hear the generators had gone off. Something's not right. So that's when I got up. Everything in my room was upside down. My glasses were gone. 10 meters down the hall, there's the engine room door. That's where I saw Davy looking at the water rising. And then I realized that that space was now underwater, and that was full of people. Maybe 15 people were sleeping back there. And then the second explosion happened. The whole boat jumped up. There's really something bad going on. So that's when I shout, abandon ship. We have to get people out of here. I crawled up on the dock and stood there looking at the boat sinking into the water. The whole boat sank in 40 seconds. As a captain, your biggest concern is the safety of the crew. When I was standing there on the dock, I realized Hanna and Fernando, they were missing. And I thought Fernando always goes into town. But Hanna, she never went off the ship at night. She was one of the people that just didn't go out partying.
The phone rang around 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was Martini calling. He told us that the boat had sunk. It wasn't believable. And so we both went straight down to the harbour. It was dark still, but we could see the Warrior laid on her side against the dock. That's the only thing I remember is seeing her.
At this point, we're just stumbling along in the dark. We were worried and upset about Hannah. As second engineer, she would have gone down and been checking something. That's what we were convinced of. We shined a light down into the engine room, and all we saw was thick, greasy black water 6 feet from the surface. Figured my chances of jumping down 10 feet into freezing water, finding scuba gear, and going down into a cabin where I might find somebody, they were just not very high. And I chickened out. I wished I had tried, but I didn't. She was just a real infectious, happy young woman. Brilliant and beautiful. It was just devastating to think that she was gone. And about 10 minutes later, the Auckland police showed up. Everybody was taken across to the police station that was right across the street. And that's where I found Hannah. She had gone off for a walk, which we were incredibly glad for. I've never been that relieved. And I put my arm around her and we walked back into the rest of the crew. And that's when Davey came up to me and said, "Fernando's down there." He didn't go out into town that night. He was missing.
Hank and I, we went straight away to where the crew was staying to find out from them what was going on. They told us there was a strong possibility we'd lost Fernando.
Police divers came. Of course, we spilled a whole shipload of fuel into Auckland Harbor. So much they couldn't get down through the fuel. When the Navy dive team came 3 hours later, they were able to get through it and find Fernando dead in his cabin. And they brought him up out of the water. There was stuff coming out of his mouth from the decomposition of the lungs. It was all so unreal at that point. I was pretty stunned.
I mean, everybody was just disbelieving that that happened and that he was gone. And we were just realizing that we had lost one of us. You know, and not knowing why or how.
After the first bomb, he went down to get his camera gear, of that I have no doubt. And when he was down there, the second bomb went off, and that's what trapped him in his cabin, and it flooded probably instantly. Being a part of Greenpeace was something that he was willing to dedicate his life to, but he wasn't willing to give up his life for it.
Rainbow Warrior now lies sinking in New Zealand's Auckland harbour after 2 explosions on board.
2 explosions killed 1 crewman. Police said no cause has been determined.
In the morning, everyone was trying to figure out what could have happened. Like, was it us?
Some of the crew members were concerned about the possibility of something in the engine room, and they could have exploded like that. But I knew there was nothing that could have gone off like that on board. I felt sure that it wasn't us.
That night, I was told that a boat had blown up in the harbour. The initial police thoughts were that it perhaps had been a gas explosion on board the boat. However, so we're putting together a team just in case it was more serious. Throughout the early hours of the morning, we got a chance to look at the damage that had been caused to the boat. It became apparent that it wasn't a simple gas explosion.
One of the divers came up. I was standing right there when he did. And he said, all the plates are going angled in.
That indicates an explosion that's occurred from the outside of the boat.
After that, their attitude changed significantly.
It became apparent we were dealing with a serious crime.
There was a hole the size of a truck on the side of the ship.
Bombs had actually been fitted to the hull and propeller. The boat had been deliberately destroyed. The next morning, things really started to ramp up into a full homicide inquiry.
The indications are that whoever planted such a device, and we're assuming they did, that they did know what they were doing.
It started to wash over us just how serious this was. We never had a crime like that.